25 men, one empress, one night that shocked the Roman Empire. This is not a rumor. This is not a wild story invented by enemies. This is a night recorded by ancient historians, a night Rome tried to erase, a night when the most powerful woman in the empire walked into the darkest corner of the city and challenged a legend of the underworld. Her name was Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, ruler of half the known world. She lived in marble halls, surrounded by gold, guarded by thousands, dressed in silks worth more than a poor man's lifetime. But on this night, she stepped into a brothel in the Sabura district, a place where the air was thick with smoke, danger, and secrets, a place where no noblewoman ever went, a place where queens did not exist. The lamps inside the brothel flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. The wooden floor creaked beneath hurried footsteps. The whispers of drunk soldiers and rough sailors drifted through the narrow corridors. In the farthest room, a small stone chamber that smelled of perfume and sweat, two women stood facing each other. One was a queen. The other was a legend. Her opponent that night was a woman named Scylla, the most feared, most respected, and most famous prostitute in Rome. Men traveled days just to see her. She could outlast any customer, any challenge. Her endurance was unmatched. Her reputation was carved into the very bones of the underground world. But she had never been challenged like this. The documentary lens would zoom in here. The tight room, the burning oil lamp, the tension thick enough to cut. Messalina arrived wearing a black wig and clothes she would never dare show inside the palace. No jewels, no servants, no imperial guards. She stepped inside as someone else entirely, someone she hid from the world. Why would an empress enter a brothel, not as a ruler, but as a competitor? The question echoed through the chamber. Even Scylla could not understand it. She looked at Messalina with confusion, anger, and disbelief. Scylla's voice broke the silence. "Why are you here, Empress? Why risk your life? You have everything: money, power, a throne. What brings you to a place built on pain?" Messalina lifted her chin. Her eyes were strangely calm, almost empty. "I am here," she said softly, "because here I am free." Her words did not make sense. Not to Scylla, not to the guards outside, not even to the historians who would argue for centuries about this night. Why would a woman with an empire risk everything just to act like someone with nothing? This was not about money. This was not about desire. This was not about thrill. This was something darker. Outside the room, the guard shouted, "Prepare yourselves! The men are waiting!" The documentary narration continues slowly, thoughtfully. No gold was offered for winning. No punishment was given for losing. The challenge existed for one reason only. The Empress demanded it. This was the heart of the mystery. Even with the power to shape laws, even with infinite wealth, even with servants to fulfill every command, Messalina chose to enter a competition that offered nothing but exhaustion and humiliation. Scylla stood close enough to feel the heat of the Empress's breath. "Do you think you will win? This world is mine, not yours." Messalina stared back. "I do not want your world. I want your victory." Scylla frowned. What does that even mean? Messalina smiled, not a gentle smile, but the smile of someone who had broken long before this night. "It means that I want to prove I can take from you the only thing you have that I do not." Scylla said nothing. For the first time she felt afraid, not of danger, but of the emptiness in the Empress's eyes. Outside the chamber, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Over 20 men waited. Some were soldiers returning from war. Some were workers from the docks. Some were men who had paid for a night they would remember for the rest of their lives. Inside the room, the tension was unbearable. The documentary voice describes the moment. The brothel was silent, as if the walls themselves could feel that something unnatural was about to happen. This was no ordinary contest. This was the Empress stepping into the only place where her crown meant nothing. The guard unlocked the heavy wooden door, but before he opened it, Scylla leaned closer and whispered, "When dawn comes, Empress, one of us will walk out, the other will be destroyed." Messalina whispered back, "I know." The door creaked open. The first man stepped inside. The challenge began. This was the night that changed Roman history. This was the night that stripped an empress of her crown and revealed the dangerous truth hidden behind her desire. This was the night that led to her fall. Because from this room, from this night, from this competition, came the chain of events that would lead directly to her execution. But that part of the story lies ahead. Tonight, the empire had no idea that its queen was in a place where queens do not belong, fighting for a victory no one could understand. And in the darkness of that brothel, under the trembling light of an oil lamp, the most powerful woman in Rome prepared to challenge the most powerful woman of the underworld. The door shut, the lamp flickered, and the night of 25 men began. The morning sun spilled over the marble rooftops of Rome, bright and golden. Markets filled with merchants shouting, carts clattering over cobblestones, and the air thick with smoke from ovens and fires. The city moved as if nothing unusual had happened. But for Valyria Messalina, everything had changed. She was no longer just an empress in fine robes, seated beside her husband, overseeing the empire. That night, in the shadow of the city, she had crossed a line that no one expected. A line between power and madness, between desire and danger. Messalina sat in her private chamber, her legs shaking, hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of water. Her black hair, wet and tangled, fell over her shoulders. She had removed her wig, her disguise from the night, but her mind was still trapped in the brothel's darkness. Outside her window, the streets of Rome were waking. Children ran through alleys, merchants shouted their prices, guards marched with rhythmic precision. To the outside world, life went on. To her, life had become a trap. "Lucia," she called softly to the maid brushing her hair, "tell me, do you notice anything strange today?" The maid's hands froze mid-stroke. Her eyes flicked nervously to the Empress. "My lady, nothing, I think?" Messalina narrowed her eyes. She knew fear when she saw it. Fear spoke in trembling hands, in silence, in avoided eye contact. "You were lying," she said softly. Lucia swallowed, her voice shaking. I heard rumors, my lady. People in the marketplace. They whisper." Messalina pressed her hands to her face, breathing fast. The whispers had begun already. People had noticed something unusual. Someone had seen her. Someone had told the story. Rome was alive with whispers, and whispers in Rome had teeth. By midday, the palace was colder than usual. Courtiers and senators gathered for the emperor's council. Their voices echoed through marble halls. Guards stood stiff and silent. Yet Messalina sensed something in the air, a tension she could not ignore. She walked among them with poise, her face calm, her steps measured. Inside, her heart pounded violently. Every whisper outside the palace, every rumor floating through the streets, threatened to reach the ears of her husband, Emperor Claudius. And if it did, she could not survive it. Two senators spoke quietly near a column. Their lips moved, but not enough to be clearly heard. She caught fragments. A noble woman, Sabura, black wig. Her stomach twisted. These fragments, as innocent as they seemed, were sparks that could ignite a fire that would consume her. Inside the council chamber, Claudius sat at the head of the table. Calm, almost fragile, he seemed harmless. But behind him, standing silently, was Narcissus, his freedman secretary, a man sharp, calculating, and loyal to the emperor. Narcissus knew everything that happened in the palace, everything, and he was watching her. Her pulse quickened. Every breath felt dangerous. Every glance might be interpreted as guilt. She knew that Narcissus's mind was like a net, catching every slip, every mistake. She lowered her eyes, sat gracefully, and pretended to focus on discussions of grain shipments, military matters, and taxation. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. It was back in the brothel, in the shadows, feeling the weight of the night, feeling the exhaustion, feeling the thrill and the emptiness. Because the truth was clear, her secret life had begun to unravel. By afternoon, the rumors had reached the city. The marketplace buzzed with conversation. Tavern owners whispered to patrons. Street children giggled as they repeated what they had overheard. Two women near a fountain spoke quietly. "Did you see her?" one asked. "I did not see her personally, but they say she wore a black wig and entered Scylla's room herself." "Impossible! A noble woman?" "Someone must have seen it. Rome talks." The story grew with every retelling. Like a fire, it spread, devouring caution and reason. Messalina could feel it even from her palace window. The city was whispering her name. Messalina, Messalina, Messalina. Her stomach tightened. Her hands shook. She knew Rome's whispers were never innocent. They were weapons. They cut through reputations and destroyed lives, and now they were turning on her. By evening, Messalina fled to her private garden, a place meant for calm, peace, and reflection. Olive trees swayed gently in the wind. A small pond reflected the sunset, but the garden could not protect her, not tonight, not anymore. She sat on a stone bench, holding her head in her hands. Her body ached from the night's contest. Her mind reeled. Her heart raced with fear and dread. "What have I done?" she whispered. The memory of Scylla's warning returned. Rome always finds out. Tears slid down her cheeks, not for pain, not for shame, but for fear. Fear that the city she ruled, that the people she commanded, would now turn against her. Fear that her power was slipping faster than she could hold. Lucius, her most trusted servant, appeared quietly. "My lady, you must be careful. Some guards spoke today. A senator might speak to the emperor about what they heard." Messalina's heart froze. "Who?" she asked. "Junia Silanos," he whispered. "Powerful, respected, dangerous. If the emperor heard her name, even whispered, it could end everything." She grabbed Lucius's arm, gripping it tight. "No one can speak to the emperor. No one. Stop them. Pay them. Threaten them. Do whatever is necessary." Lucius bowed, knowing the danger. "Yes, my lady, I will protect you." But Messalina knew the truth. No one could protect her from Rome. No one. That night, Narcissus spoke quietly with two palace guards. "Tell me again," he said. about the woman seen in the Sabora district. The guards whispered the story. She wore a black wig, entered Scylla's room. People saw her. Narcissus leaned back, smiling faintly. And who does this description match? The guard hesitated. The Empress. Narcissus's smile widened. A weapon now rested in his hands, a weapon sharp enough to destroy an empress. He would only need the right moment to strike. Messalina sat by her window, looking at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Her heart ached. Fear gnawed at her. She hugged her arms around her body, shivering. "Please," she whispered to no one, "let this die. Let this disappear." But she knew it would not. Rome's whispers never died. They grew, they spread, they waited. And soon they would come for her. Very soon. And nothing could stop them. Rome was a city of power, whispers, and shadows. Every marble hall, every narrow alley, every gilded chamber held secrets. Secrets that could elevate a man or destroy him. For Valeria Messalina, the stakes had never been higher. The rumors from the Sabora district had begun to spread like wildfire. They were quiet at first, whispers in the marketplace or among servants. But by the time the sun rose the next morning, the story had taken shape, growing into a web of danger that reached every corner of the empire. Messalina awoke early, as she always did, her dark hair still damp from her nightly rituals. She moved through the palace silently, her footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. Servants hurried past her, lowering their eyes. They sensed something had shifted. They felt the tension before it became visible. She stopped in front of a mirror. The reflection staring back was calm, almost regal, but her mind was a storm. "They are talking about me," she thought. "They are always talking. They always find a way." In the grand council chamber, Claudius sat at the head of a long table. His stutter, his awkward gestures, his hesitant words, once considered weaknesses, had protected him. His enemies assumed he was harmless, but he was now emperor, and power had a way of revealing the truth. Messalina entered the chamber, her gown flowing, her head held high. To any casual observer, she was the perfect empress, but she felt the weight of every eye upon her, and the whispers that had begun to creep through the city now followed her into the palace. Behind Claudius stood Narcissus, his gaze sharp, his mind calculating. Every movement, every glance from Messalina was catalogued. He knew, as everyone in the palace knew, that the empress was extraordinary, but dangerous. Later that day, Messalina moved through the halls where senators gathered. Their whispers were soft, almost polite, but their words carried venom. "Did you see her yesterday?" one senator asked another. "Impossible," replied the other. "Who could dare to enter the Sabora?" The senator's words were careful. No one wanted to speak too loudly. The empress's reach was terrifying. But fear could only hold for so long. Messalina passed them with a smile, but inside she was calculating. Every whisper, every glance, every word was a potential threat. Rome was a city built on appearances, and one misstep could undo her entirely. Her thoughts returned to the night in the brothel, the oil lamps flickering, the scent of perfume mixed with sweat, the hum of anticipation, the nervous tension of 25 men waiting, and her. She remembered Scylla, the legendary prostitute, her eyes wide with disbelief, her lips pressed together, almost as if she could not believe what she was witnessing. Messalina had done something extraordinary, and perhaps impossible. She had entered a world where no empress had dared to tread. She had competed, and she had won. But the victory came with a price. The palace was now aware. The city was aware. And the more she tried to hide, the faster the truth moved. Messalina retreated to the gardens of the palace, a space of marble fountains, fragrant flowers, and serene paths. But serenity was gone. She walked slowly, her hands brushing petals, thinking of the threads connecting power, loyalty, and betrayal. Rome was a web. Each senator, each guard, each servant was a thread. Pull one, and it vibrated through the city. Messalina understood this better than most. She had seen power grow and crumble. She had been young when she married Claudius, unprepared for the games she was about to play. But now, she was queen of the game. And yet, even queens could fall. Narcissus had begun to act. He had discovered the rumors. He had spoken to guards, servants, and officials. He had collected names, times, and places, all building a case against Messalina. The empress had made enemies, not just among the common people, but among those closest to the throne. Senators she humiliated, generals she ignored, officials she dismissed. All were waiting, patiently. One mistake could give Narcissus and others the proof they needed to destroy her. Messalina's heart pounded. She understood that the palace, for all its grandeur, was also a prison. The same walls that protected her could confine her. The same servants who obeyed could betray. The night in the brothel revealed something deeper. Messalina was no ordinary empress. She was ambitious, cunning, and dangerously fearless. She played with men and power alike. Her sexual behavior, though shocking, was only one layer of a complex strategy. Some historians would later suggest psychological compulsion. Modern interpretations might diagnose hypersexuality or extreme risk-taking behavior. But in the Roman context, her actions were dangerous for another reason. They broke the rules of gender and power. A man using sexual power was expected. A woman with such freedom and ambition, threatened the entire social order. Messalina was aware of this, and perhaps she enjoyed it. Perhaps she thrived on it. By nightfall, the empress realized that the rumors were no longer whispers, they were echoes. The city had begun to notice. Servants avoided eye contact. Guards glanced at her nervously. Even Claudius, oblivious in some ways, was being warned. Messalina felt fear for the first time in years. It was not fear of death. She had faced danger before. It was fear of exposure, fear of losing the empire she controlled so easily during the day and so secretly at night. She walked alone in the palace gardens, the moon reflecting off the marble fountains. Every shadow seemed alive. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper, repeating her name, Messalina, Messalina, Messalina. She wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of her secrets pressed down, heavy as stone. Narcissus continued his silent work. Guards reported, senators whispered, and slowly, carefully, the empress's network of secrets began to unravel. Messalina knew that every advantage she had gained through power, wealth, and cunning could disappear with a single misstep. Rome was patient, but it was also unforgiving. And Rome never forgot. As she sat in her private chamber that night, she understood the truth. She was alone. Even the most loyal servants could not stop what was coming. Even her beauty, her cunning, her dominance, all the things that made her legendary, could not protect her from the eyes of Rome and the growing suspicion of the emperor's closest advisors. Outside, the city slept. The wind carried the scent of olive oil and fresh bread. Street lamps flickered. Guards paced silently. But the real danger was invisible. In conversations half-spoken, in notes slipped under doors, in whispers that carried through corridors. Rome was waiting, and Messalina's time was shrinking. She had played the game of power with extraordinary skill. She had bent men to her will, she had hosted parties that humiliated senators, enslaved rivals with shame, and manipulated her husband with subtle cunning. But now the web was closing, and the Empress knew it.
The city of Rome slept uneasily. Lanterns flickered in narrow alleys. Soldiers patrolled silently. But in one hidden corner of the Suburra district, the air was alive with anticipation, tension, and danger. Inside a dimly lit brothel, the stage was set. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on stone walls. The smell of incense mixed with sweat and perfume. Two women stood facing each other, not ordinary women, but forces of history about to collide. One was Scylla, the legendary prostitute, unmatched in skill, endurance, and reputation. Men traveled from across the empire for a single night with her. Her fame was carved into Rome's underworld. She was confident. She was strong. She had never lost. And then there was Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, wife of Claudius, ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. She was dressed in simple dark clothes, her hair hidden beneath a black wig. To anyone in the room, she appeared ordinary. To anyone outside, she was untouchable. But tonight, she would challenge everything they thought possible. This was not about money, not about power, not about fame. This was a contest of endurance, cunning, and sheer will. The challenge was simple in description, but impossible in execution. Who could satisfy more men in a single night? 25 men, or possibly more according to some sources, would take part. Each would enter the room one after the other, without pause. The rules were few, the expectations terrifying. Messalina's motivation is impossible to fully understand. She had wealth beyond imagination. She had a throne beside an emperor. She had power over life and death, and yet she chose to enter a brothel, compete against a professional, and push her body and mind to the limit. Some historians argue she was driven by psychological compulsion. Others suggest boredom, desire for dominance, or a need to prove herself beyond the palace walls. Whatever the reason, the result was a story that would echo for 2,000 years. The first man entered the room. He was nervous, unaware that one of the women was Rome's empress. Messalina's hands trembled only slightly as she greeted him. Her mind focused on rhythm, stamina, and endurance. Scylla watched her carefully, her eyes narrowing. She had faced many challengers before, but none like this. The air between the two women was electric, respect, fear, and competition all intertwined. Hour by hour the challenge continued. Men came and went. The room grew warm, heavy with sweat. Oil lamps flickered more violently as exhaustion set in. Scylla, experienced as she was, began to falter under the pace. Messalina, fueled by something harder to name, ambition, obsession, compulsion, continued, barely slowing. 25 men in 24 hours. Even modern medicine recognizes the impossibility. The body cannot recover, cannot rest, cannot function normally. Muscles ache, energy drains, and exhaustion becomes dangerous. Messalina and Scylla were pushing themselves beyond the limits of human endurance. Ancient sources hint at the unimaginable strain. Pliny the Elder describes it matter-of-factly, as if recording a simple fact. Tacitus emphasizes the scandal and shock. Suetonius focuses on the public's disbelief. No matter the source, the central fact remains. Messalina survived. More than that, she reportedly won. What drove her? What could push a young empress to compete in such a contest? Modern psychology suggests a pattern known as hypersexuality disorder, a condition where desire becomes compulsive, intrusive, and escalating, even when harmful.
For Messalina, it was more than desire. It was power expressed physically. It was a need to dominate not through law or wealth, but through the most personal and primal human experiences. She blurred the lines between public persona and private impulse. The Empress became both ruler and participant, both manipulator and performer. This was why Rome whispered. This was why her story survived centuries. By midnight, Sylla could no longer keep pace. Her strength and stamina, unmatched by ordinary standards, could not withstand the relentless rhythm of the competition. Messalina, despite exhaustion, continued. The room grew silent between participants, except for the sound of breathing, footsteps, and the faint creak of the floorboards. Outside, the world had no idea what was happening. Inside, history was being made. At some point, Sylla admitted defeat. She stepped back, her face pale, her eyes wide. Messalina had won. And yet, even in victory, Messalina was not finished. The ancient sources claim she still sought more men, more challenge, more evidence that she could conquer beyond all limits. When the contest ended, Messalina retreated to her quarters. Her body was exhausted beyond description. Her mind was both elated and terrified. She had accomplished something impossible, something scandalous, something that would forever be remembered, and perhaps misremembered. The Bravo, once a place of ordinary business, had witnessed an extraordinary event. Stories would circulate, rumors would spread, and historians would debate for centuries whether this was truth, exaggeration, or legend. Even her closest servants did not know the full extent. Only Messalina knew what had happened that night. Only she felt the mixture of power, fear, shame, and exhilaration that the contest had brought. This night was not an isolated event. Ancient sources suggest that Messalina continued to blur the lines between her private indulgences and her public power. She began hosting elaborate parties, gatherings that tested social and moral boundaries, entangling senators and officials they could not escape. Each act of excess became a weapon. Each secret whispered a lever of control. And yet each risk brought her closer to exposure, closer to disaster. Rome, patient and watchful, was beginning to tighten its gaze.
Why does this night matter? Not just because it shocked Rome, not just because it challenged every expectation of an empress, not just because historians debate its authenticity. It matters because it shows the extremes of power, ambition, and human desire. Messalina was not merely indulging herself, she was testing the limits of control, of reputation, and of the world around her. Rome's whispers began to harden into judgment. Allies would hesitate. Enemies would gather evidence. The empire, vast and powerful, had noticed. And Messalina, who ruled with confidence during the day, now faced the dangerous truth. Her private actions could destroy everything she had built. The morning after the contest, Rome woke to a city unaware of the storm brewing within its walls. Markets bustled, merchants shouted, and the Mediterranean sun glinted off white marble temples. Yet inside the palace, the air was heavy, tense, almost electric. Valeria Messalina sat in her private chambers, staring into a polished bronze mirror. Her reflection stared back, calm, poised, regal. But the truth beneath the surface was far more fragile. The previous night's triumph had marked her as legendary, but it had also made her vulnerable. For the first time, Messalina realized that whispers could become weapons, and that even the most loyal servants could be caught in the crossfire of ambition and fear. By mid-morning, rumors from the Sabora district had already begun to seep into the palace. A footman, trembling, brought a message from a senator visiting Rome from the provinces. He had overheard a tavern conversation.
"People are talking," the footman stammered. "They say, the Empress herself, in the brothel." Messalina's lips pressed into a thin line. She had expected whispers. She had prepared for gossip. But the speed at which the story spread shocked her. Rome's walls were not silent. They were alive, listening, repeating. Even her closest advisors had begun to exchange nervous glances. Some avoided her eyes. Others whispered behind closed doors. Every glance, every tone of voice carried meaning. She realized then that she was no longer just the empress. She was a target. Emperor Claudius, in his own way, remained blissfully unaware. His stutter, his limp, and his gentle demeanor had shielded him from understanding the full scope of palace politics. To him, the city hummed with the ordinary concerns of governance. He did not yet grasp the danger lurking in the shadows of his empire. But others in the palace were awake. Narcissus, the freedman's secretary, watched silently. Every whisper, every rumor, every hesitation among the servants was noted and stored. He understood perfectly that the Empress, for all her brilliance and cunning, had created a vulnerability, and he would exploit it. By mid-afternoon, the tension became tangible. Senators who had attended Messalina's elaborate parties exchanged notes. Some were afraid, some were angry, some were calculating. The Empress had humiliated them, exposed them, entangled them in acts that could ruin their careers. Now they whispered in hushed tones. "She cannot continue unchecked. She must be stopped." The message was clear. Her private life was no longer just her own. It was a threat to the stability of the empire, and every action she had taken in secrecy, every indulgence, every display of dominance, could be used against her. Messalina understood this more clearly than anyone. Sitting alone in her garden, she traced her fingers along the smooth stone of a fountain. Her reflection rippled in the water. The woman she saw was powerful, beautiful, and cunning, but she was also isolated. For years she had manipulated the empire's most powerful men, bending them to her will. She had hosted parties that ensnared senators, generals, and officials alike. She used desire as a weapon, shame as a tool, and fear as a lever of control. And yet, she now realized that those same tools could be turned against her. Narcissus moved quietly through the palace, gathering evidence, observing patterns, and building a case. He had long understood the threat posed by Messalina. Her influence over Claudius, her manipulation of officials, and her private scandals made her one of the most dangerous figures in Rome. He did not act rashly. He waited for the right moment. He knew that power could be toppled not by brute force, but by precision, timing, and the creation of undeniable proof. Messalina's victory in the brothel contest had been extraordinary, but it had also given him everything he needed. By evening, Messalina's paranoia had grown. She could feel the palace closing in around her. Servants whispered when she passed. Guards lingered in hallways, eyes fixed on her. Every conversation, every glance carried a potential threat. She began to take precautions. Messages were intercepted, letters were monitored, allies were bribed discreetly, threats were made discreetly. But no matter how careful she was, the reality was undeniable. The empire she ruled by day and manipulated by night was starting to slip from her grasp. Even her husband, Claudius, unknowingly played a role. His ignorance of the details, his reliance on Narcissus and other advisors, meant that her secrets could be revealed without warning. The tension reached a breaking point during a late-night council meeting. Messalina sat at the edge of the room, her fingers tapping against the arm of her chair. Senators spoke cautiously, measuring their words. Narcissus, standing behind Claudius, spoke softly to the emperor. He presented small fragments of information, seemingly trivial, yet carefully chosen to create doubt. Claudius listened. He did not fully understand the gravity of what he heard, but the seeds of suspicion had been planted, and Rome, like a patient predator, waited. Alone in her chambers after the meeting, Messalina allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her hands trembled, her body ached, her mind raced. She thought of the contest, of the brothel, of Scylla. She thought of the whispers, the fear, the growing network of enemies. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had miscalculated. Power had always been her playground. She had tested limits, broken rules, and bent men to her will. But the game had changed. The stakes were higher. The enemies were closer, and one wrong move could destroy her entirely. Outside, Rome was unaware of the tension within the palace walls. Markets thrived, children played, soldiers patrolled, but the city, patient and observant, was waiting for the collapse of its most famous empress. Every whisper, every glance, every rumor carried through the streets. By morning, it would be impossible to contain the story. Messalina's victory had become her vulnerability. Her power had drawn attention, and the empire's machinery, slow and calculated, was beginning to turn against her. Messalina's life, which had seemed unstoppable, was now at a tipping point. The same skills that had made her legendary, intelligence, beauty, cunning, audacity, now made her a target. Rome had shifted from a city under her control to a city that observed her, judged her, and prepared to act. And in that shift, the first threads of her downfall were visible. The Empress, once untouchable, now faced the reality that her secrets could destroy her. The empire she ruled by day and manipulated by night was starting to turn against her. The beginning of the end had arrived. Rome was changing. The city's heartbeat, once steady and predictable, now raced with tension. Marble corridors echoed with whispers, shadows stretched longer than they should. Every corner, every servant, every senator carried the weight of rumors that could ignite disaster. Valyria Messalina, the empress who had once walked through life untouchable, began to feel the walls closing in. Her nights of secret indulgence, her unparalleled audacity, and her manipulation of Rome's most powerful men had drawn attention, and the attention had now turned to danger. Narcissus had been patient. He had waited, observing the empress carefully, gathering evidence. Each meeting, each council session, each palace party was recorded in his memory, catalogued for the moment when the truth could be used decisively. Messalina had underestimated him. She had assumed her beauty, power, and audacity made her untouchable. She had thought the rumors of her night in the brothel and her scandalous parties were contained, manageable, harmless. She was wrong. Narcissus understood one fundamental truth. Evidence could destroy even the most powerful woman, and now he had what he needed. By mid-morning, Messalina's enemies had gathered. Senators, generals, and officials who had endured humiliation, manipulation, and blackmail began to whisper openly. Their fear had shifted to action. "Her power is dangerous," one senator said to another. "She cannot continue," another replied. "They wait for her to overreach. Once she steps too far, we strike." It was a calculated patience that only Rome's elite could master. The empress had underestimated the patience of those she had manipulated, the loyalty she had assumed, and the reach of the empire's secret machinery. Messalina, unaware of the full scope of the conspiracy, continued her daily routine. She attended to Claudius with charm and grace, managing imperial affairs with precision. By day she was untouchable, brilliant and regal, but by night her indulgences escalated. She began hosting larger parties, more elaborate gatherings, pushing the boundaries of what was socially and politically acceptable. Senators, wives, and officials were drawn into acts they could never speak of publicly. What she saw as power and control, her enemies saw as leverage, evidence, and opportunity. The stage for betrayal was set. Messalina's audacity, her control, and her private scandals had made her legendary, but also vulnerable. Narcissus moved quietly. He intercepted messages, monitored servants, and ensured that Claudius remained unaware until the moment of action. Timing, he knew, was everything. The Empress, in her confidence, did not see the storm approaching. She believed herself untouchable. She believed that her cunning had secured her place above all others. But every system, every network, every ally she had manipulated had turned against her, waiting for the moment when her overreach would provide proof. It began subtly. Rumors spread beyond the palace walls. Servants whispered of the Empress in the brothel, of her scandalous parties, of acts that challenged the norms of Rome. The public did not fully understand the implications, but they were shocked. Rome, a city that tolerated excess among men, could not stomach female audacity on this scale. The whispers reached the ears of Claudius's trusted advisors. Narcissus, with precision, presented undeniable evidence. Letters, witnesses, and detailed accounts of Messalina's behavior were compiled. Claudius, once oblivious, was forced to see the truth. With Claudius distracted at the port overseeing grain shipments, Narcissus acted. He marshaled the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite soldiers tasked with protecting the emperor. They moved with efficiency, precision, and secrecy. Messalina remained unaware, still absorbed in her own affairs. She did not anticipate the speed or decisiveness of the move against her. When news finally reached her, it was too late. The palace, once her domain, had turned against her. The network of spies, informants, and conspirators had closed in. Messalina gathered her children, Britannicus and Octavia, and attempted a final act of manipulation. She hoped that the sight of her children would sway Claudius, that his love for her family would protect her. But Narcissus intercepted her. He knew that emotional appeals had always worked on Claudius. He prevented the meeting, ensuring that reason, evidence, and political necessity would govern the emperor's decisions, not sentiment. Messalina's desperation was palpable. She moved through the palace gardens, her mind racing. She considered every option, every escape, but the empire she had controlled for years now felt like a cage. Silius, the man with whom Messalina had publicly married, was executed first. He did not resist, did not beg. His death was swift, a clear message to all who had participated in her private scandals. The purge that followed was methodical. Guests from the scandalous wedding were hunted down. Some were executed outright. Others were given the option of suicide, a grim practice in Rome that allowed them to die on their own terms rather than at the hands of soldiers. The web of betrayal was complete. Every person who had aided, witnessed, or tolerated her overreach became a target. Messalina, now isolated, retreated to the gardens of Lycisca, an estate she had acquired through intrigue and manipulation. Ironically, the place of her power would become her tomb. Her mother, Lepida, was present, offering what comfort she could. Messalina's mind oscillated between rage, despair, and disbelief. She attempted to write to Claudius, to plead for mercy, but the words would not come. She considered suicide, but found herself paralyzed by fear. The tribune and centurion arrived. They offered her the chance to end her life, to die with dignity. She could not. Pride, terror and disbelief held her motionless. Finally, the soldiers acted. The tribune struck, and Valyria Messalina, legendary Empress of Rome, died at 22. Her mother performed one final act of love, arranging her daughter's body, closing her eyes, restoring what dignity death allowed. Then she vanished from history. Claudius, upon receiving news, displayed no emotion. He continued his meal as if nothing significant had occurred. The empire had moved decisively, erasing the threat and sending a clear message that no one, not even the empress, was above Rome. Historians would later debate the truth of Messalina's life, the nature of her excess, and the scale of her scandals. Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny, and Juvenal all wrote with bias, exaggeration, and moral judgment. Yet the pattern remains. Her behavior, real or exaggerated, led directly to her downfall. Her story became a cautionary tale, a lesson in the limits of power, ambition, and human desire.
Valeria Messalina was gone. The gardens of Lycisca, once her sanctuary and now her tomb, were quiet. The empire continued, indifferent to the life that had burned so brightly and ended so tragically. Yet the story of Messalina did not die. In fact, it had only just begun to take shape in the minds of generations to come. Her life, scandalous, audacious, and controversial, became more than a tale of excess. It became a warning, a reflection of Rome's fears, and the lens through which historians would examine power, gender, and desire. Ancient historians wrote her story with fervor, fascination, and bias. Tacitus, 50 years after her death, presented her as a moral caution, a woman whose lust and ambition corrupted the empire. Suetonius, delighting in gossip, exaggerated her excesses, painting scenes that were likely closer to legend than fact. Juvenal, the satirical poet, mocked her as an emblem of female depravity. Pliny, though more measured, recorded stories that fascinated and shocked readers for centuries. Each source reflected a particular viewpoint: moralists, satirists, and chroniclers of scandal. They shaped a narrative that often overshadowed the realities of her life. Was she truly as excessive as they claimed, or were these stories a reflection of Roman anxieties about women in power? Modern historians continue to debate these questions. Some argue that her sexual exploits were real but exaggerated. Others claim that the stories were politically motivated, designed to discredit a woman who had dared to wield power independently. Regardless of the specifics, one fact is clear: Messalina's story endured, becoming a symbol that transcended her brief life. What made Messalina so notorious was not simply her behavior, but what it represented. In a society where male dominance was unquestioned, a woman exercising power in both political and sexual realms was dangerous. Her intelligence, ambition, and willingness to manipulate those around her challenged every assumption about gender roles. Male emperors, even when guilty of extreme sexual crimes, often escaped historical condemnation. Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero engaged in acts that rivaled or exceeded Messalina's in brutality or depravity. Yet it was the empress who became infamous, her name synonymous with sexual excess. The lesson from Rome is stark. Female agency, especially when tied to power and sexuality, was intolerable. Messalina was destroyed, not only physically, but historically. Her legacy manipulated to warn others against similar ambition. Even as centuries passed, the shadow of Messalina influenced art, literature, and popular culture.
In the Renaissance, writers and painters used her as an archetype of the dangerous, seductive woman. Playwrights dramatized her life, emphasizing scandal and tragedy. By the Enlightenment, scholars debated the reliability of sources, questioning whether the empress had been a villain or a victim of propaganda. The story of a young woman navigating power, politics, and desire became a mirror reflecting societal anxieties across time. In literature and theater, her life offered a narrative of drama and spectacle. Beauty, intelligence, audacity, scandal, and tragedy. A story that could enthrall, shock, and instruct audiences. Messalina's story is not only about scandal, it is about human nature, ambition, and the precarious balance of power. She demonstrated that intelligence and audacity can yield great influence, but they also invite danger when combined with secrecy, indulgence, or overreach. Her contests, her parties, and her manipulations were expressions of control. They allowed her to dominate men, senators, and even the emperor himself. Yet they also sowed the seeds of her downfall. Each act that solidified her power also created evidence that could, and as it did, lead to her destruction. There is a lesson here about the fragility of power. Even absolute power, when exercised in ways that challenge societal norms, is vulnerable to collapse. Messalina's story illustrates how reputation, perception, and politics can outweigh even the most formidable personal abilities. It is impossible to completely separate the truth from the legend. Ancient sources provide glimpses of her life, but each comes with distortion. The brothel contest, the palace orgies, the public wedding with Silius. Some historians accept elements of these stories. Others view them as exaggeration, propaganda, or myth-making. What remains undeniable is the pattern. Messalina's behavior, real or perceived, threatened established norms. Her life demonstrates how stories are shaped by those in power, and how individuals, especially women, can be remembered more for legend than fact. Her legend, exaggerated or not, became a narrative tool. Writers, poets, and historians used it to caution against unchecked ambition, sexual audacity, and female agency. From a modern viewpoint, Messalina's life raises challenging questions. How much of her story is true? How much was political manipulation? And why has female sexual agency been judged more harshly than male excess throughout history? Feminist historians argued that the disproportionate focus on Messalina's sexuality compared to male emperors reveals systemic gender bias. Her story is a case study in how historical narratives are shaped by those in power, and how female autonomy is often punished in ways male behavior is not. Yet there is also a recognition of her brilliance. Messalina navigated one of the most dangerous political environments in history. She exercised influence over senators, generals, and even an emperor. She understood leverage, power, and human desire in ways few could match. Her downfall, then, was not a failure of cunning or intellect. It was the inevitable consequence of challenging a patriarchal system that tolerated men but feared women. 2,000 years later, Valyria Messalina remains a symbol. She embodies audacity, scandal, power, and tragedy. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about gender, power, and morality. It reminds us that history is not just about facts, but also about perception, propaganda, and the enduring fear of female agency. Her legacy is complex. She is villain, victim, manipulator, and survivor. She is a cautionary tale, a subject of fascination,
and a historical enigma. Her life invites us to question how much of history is written by winners, how reputations are constructed, and how women's stories are used to reinforce societal norms. Messalina's shadow endures because her life challenges us. It asks us to look at the interplay of power and desire, to recognize the dangers of ambition, and to understand how society punishes those who defy its expectations. Even in death, she continues to captivate. Her story is not just ancient history. It is a lens through which we examine human nature, the complexity of power, and the enduring consequences of living boldly, scandalously, and unapologetically.